Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. It's your favorite doctor and comedian, Suhail Essa. And thank you for joining us for another episode of the Daily Dose. Today's episode, we're going to be discussing social distancing. Now, in the current pandemic that we find ourselves in, this word has been thrown around a lot. And I don't think people fully understand what this word means. So I'm going to explain the term based on the definitions that I've got from the CDC, which is that big organization in America that deals with all the infectious outbreaks. So, what does social distancing actually mean? So, social distancing, well, the definition of social distancing is any measure put in place that prevents the contact or close contact of people, thus slowing the spread of a contagious pathogen from person to person. So it can be any measure. Like if you look at what the government has done now, we'll discuss that later. But like in the CDC, what they have recommended is that you stay away from mass gatherings. So mass gatherings was one of them. Social distancing in real life, which is keeping a distance of approximately 2 meters between one another. Now, distance of 2 meters, that's like they say it's almost like one person's length between each other, which is a very tall person because I'm 1.85. That's a very large person to be keeping as a distance between people. But that's what they recommend. Okay? And another question that everybody is asking is, why do we do this? Like, why exactly are we doing this? So, social distancing, when done correctly, effectively slows down the chain or even breaks the chain of transmission from one person to the other. So, like, for example, you have one person who was going to go to work today. Now, let's say, for example, this guy is an asymptomatic carrier. He's got the virus, but he doesn't have symptoms yet or may never ever have symptoms. Now, this guy goes out to work. When he gets there, he shakes the janitor's hand. Then he shakes his co-worker's hand, then his boss's hand. And then on his way out, the tea lady's hand. He's infected about 5 people. And let's just say, for instance, that every single infected person is definitely going to infect every single person they come into contact with. That's a lot of people being infected. You can take any other example, one that might be close to home for some of you. Your domestic worker comes to work, you're infected. You then hand her money at the end of the day. She then takes that money, which you've touched and you didn't wash your hands. She now fixes her hair, rubs her face. She's now infected. She gets into a taxi with 16 people. You know those quantums, always choked. Have you ever seen a taxi that only had 4 people? Have you? Never. It's full. Everyone is sitting tightly closed in that space right next to each other. You basically isolated in a square that's moving and you can't get out of it. So 16 people enclosed in that space. Now let's say again that every person that's infected will infect everybody that they come into contact with. In that enclosed space with no ventilation, chances are she's going to infect everybody else in that taxi. So that's another 16 people. Then she goes home, infects everyone in her family, needs to go to the shop, infects everyone there. Do you see how this chain continues? Now, everyone in the taxi, all 16 of those people, will now go home to their families or go to work the next day and infect another 10 people. So now you're sitting on 160, 200, 300, 400 people. It exponentially increases. But if that first guy didn't go to work, he would never have infected any of those people. And then in turn, none of those people would have gone home and infected their families or anybody else. Now, if your domestic worker just got paid to stay at home and you cleaned up after yourself once in a while, she wouldn't have to get into that taxi with 16 other people, infect all of them, which would go back and infect every one of their families. So you see, the chain is broken. That's the whole point of social distancing. Now, how has our government implemented, the social distancing? So initially, I think it was the 15th of March, President Ramaphosa came out with certain regulations or restrictions that he had in mind. One was school closures. Now, school closures is actually quite an interesting thing. School closures is one of the only social distancing measures that has proven time and time again to work. In fact, a lot of people have this idea or this theory or myth that these types of viruses, whether it's flu virus, SARS, MERS, H1N1, swine flu, whatever it is, these viruses don't thrive in hot conditions. That's not the truth. That's not the truth. According to this theory, which obviously still requires research to prove, this theory done by a scientist in America, I'll put the link if you guys are interested in reading this boring article. But anyway, basically what he said was the actual reason for decreased spread was that schools have summer holidays. So schools are out during the hot periods of the year. Whereas in the cold winter months, kids are at school. Windows are closed. And kids spread the virus very easily. So school closure is number one. In fact, that is why most people actually don't believe that it's temperature dependent. This virus doesn't have any temperature. It just lives where kids are. Kids spread this thing easily. So that's why Ramaphosa's decision to shut down schools, excellent, perfect, at the right time. He shut down schools before he put the country on lockdown, which means he knew how important that was. Children, they're messy, they have these snotty noses, they're always rubbing their nose, they got that big snot bubble, they're touching everyone. That's not the environment you want to have a virus in. Now Corona is just sitting there like, yeah, I'm gonna eat all of these children. Don't want that. So school closures, very good. Then the next and another important social distancing measure is restricting movement. Now, I discussed this before, but in Italy, when they did the lockdown, and particularly in the epicenter, Lombardy, in Italy, a lot of people fled and moved to other parts of the country. They didn't restrict any of their movement. So what happened was you took a virus or disease that was stuck in one place and then moved it all the way to every other part of your country. By shutting off our borders, we prevented other cases from coming in and infecting more people here. So all we have to deal with is the cases that are currently here. That's known as internal transmission. When you've got it already in a place, whether it's a city, a country, whatever, a province, you've got it only in one. And so you continue dealing with those cases in the one province or the one city or the one country. But if you let more and more people in, now you're adding to the problem. So restricting movement is very important. And then the cancellation of mass gatherings, which was very tough for a lot of people. For myself, initially when I heard about this, comedy show canceled. Entire people's careers. I know there's economic, effects and losses. There are negative effects of social distancing. Like under lockdown conditions, you have mental health disturbances. It's well documented. Stress, anxiety, depression. Sometimes they've even reported substance abuse. People sit at home. I know a lot of people that stocked up on alcohol the day before, and their plan was for 21 days, they're going to sit at home and just drink themselves into oblivion. That's no solution to this problem. The reason why this government banned alcohol and cigarettes during this time is so that people can actually be at home but still try and be productive. and not waste or spend their money on alcohol and cigarettes and things that are going to make their health even worse, so that when they come to the hospital, they're going to be even in a worse state than they were before the lockdown. So, drug abuse, mental health disturbances, and economic losses are also negative effects of social distancing, which make it very tough. The other measure that we've put into place is the physical distancing, because it limits the possibilities of contact with airborne particles. Like if two people are standing in a queue 2 meters apart from each other, unless the one guy is actively coughing on you, it's very difficult for those particles to actually reach you. Chances are they're just going to fall, not going to make it. And that's the importance of social distancing. Now, in the world, they've looked at every single measure, whether it's protective gear, whether it's treatment, everything. But when it comes to viral outbreaks, social distancing is actually ranked far superior to any other form of preventative measures. Don't know if you guys know this, but like some may say protective gear or hand washing is superior. But if you're in your own home, it doesn't matter how many times you wash your hands. Doesn't matter. If you're not in contact with anyone, at all, you're not going to spread the virus. And neither will you be a victim to have the virus spread to you. Now, obviously, when you're at home with your family, if you're going out, then take the necessary precautions when you come home to not spread it further to your family. But social distancing is the one that works. And time again, it's been proven. In 1918, in St. Louis, I don't know how they pronounce it in America, but out there in America, they had an influenza outbreak. Now, I know a lot of you guys are like, what, flu? Come on, bro. What are you talking? In 1918, flu was just as crazy as COVID-19. People were dying of the flu. Just the regular, they were dying from that stuff. Now, we have vaccines, we have cures, but even during that time, that vaccine took at least 2 years, 3 years before it even came out. Now, in St. Louis, what they did was they implemented social distancing and they kept people far apart. They closed down schools. They basically locked down the whole city. And what they found was, versus Philadelphia, which is not very far from St. Louis, their death rates were about 2 times lower than Philadelphia. Philadelphia had a 2 times higher death rate. Why? Because they delayed on closing schools. They didn't implement the lockdown. They were just being careless. So I think the number one message that you guys can take home from this is just to stay at home. No amount of masks, no amount of gloves, no amount of even hand washing is going to protect you if you're coming into contact with people. Social distancing is the only way that we can prevent this, together with everything else. But remember, number one is social distancing. Now, you can't be putting on 3 layers of clothes, a jersey, a jacket, a shirt, a scarf, 2 masks. One of them is an N95, the other is a surgical, another 4 layers of gloves to go and hang out with your friends and touch each other. No, it's not going to work. Got to stay home. Thank you guys for listening to another episode of The Daily Dose. Hope you guys have enjoyed. If you guys have any more questions, feel free to ask on Instagram, Facebook, Twitter even. I don't really use Twitter much, but you guys are welcome to ask as well. Tomorrow's episode is going to be on spirituality under this pandemic. So, tune in for tomorrow's episode. Thank you guys for tuning in today. My name is Dr. Essa, your favorite doctor and comedian. Assalamu alaikum, peace, love, good night.